Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about leading, tracking, and kerning. I'm going to open up a document that I have ready to go. And if you're working in InDesign, you might get this message sometime, and that means basically the computer you're sitting on does not have the fonts that your documents or that you've worked on. Perhaps you worked on on a computer somewhere else, and you're going to another computer. Not all computers have the same fonts. This feature is very handy when working with fonts because it makes sure that you have the right fonts and um, be able to work on the project. But you can still work on the project because what you'll see is in the document that all your the fonts that are missing, the text becomes pink or outlined in a highlighted in a pink, and it says like, oh, that's the wrong. You don't have the font. It knows the name of the font. If you look up here, it knows that it's CoronaNet MT. And it's a bold. When you go back to the computer this font originated from, it will actually link up properly. But nonetheless, you can still work on the document and you can still edit and move forward with it. So we looked at these. Let's see. I want to go down here to where is it? We'll just work with this one right here. So in order to work with typography, and I'd like to zoom in just a little closer here. The tool that you'll need for this is you're going to need under Tool Type and Tables, you're going to need a character panel, and you're going to need the paragraph. I'm going to bring those over here so you can see them. Particularly, for leading, tracking, and kerning, it's pretty much going to be the character panel right here. I'm going to just zoom in just a little slightly because it's hard to read some of these panels when they're small, but that should be better. And of course, we know how to control the typography font, so we want to make it bigger. I want to just undo that and bring it back to 12 point. This is the leading. And leading within typography operates within points. And so if you think about this, there's 12-point font and there's a 32-point leading. If I do 36 here, that means it's 3 times the height of the font. So basically the font here is basically the cap height of the M. So 1, 2, about 3 cap heights of the letter, of the capital letter, will be the spacing. The other thing about points is that it's actually more accurate than inches and units of inches. Basically, in a font, there's 72 points per inch. So that means if you're using a 72-point font, it's going to be about 1 inch high. So that's actually good to understand when you're trying to do large scale, like billboards, where the display has to be really large and fonts have to be very large. You can actually mathematically calculate how big your fonts are going to be, or how many points it's going to be, to how many inches that you need the font to be. So if it's going to be X, but you can get a little bit of math into that. I digress. So we have the leading. Right below it, you have the tracking. And you can see that's getting a little wider and wider. The wider it gets, it's going to push lines down if necessary. All right. And then there's some other controls here which I actually never use. You can actually make the font taller. I tend not to use it because I like to honor the designer who made the font and use their fonts as the way they saw or envisioned how it was going to be utilized. They never imagined that the computer here would actually stretch their fonts, because these fonts were, if they were in letterpress, it would be carved in metal, so you can never change it. But I think they're kind of novel tools. They don't necessarily work that well. This one here can change it as a kind of an italics, but again, you should use the font if it has a style which is indicated as italics rather than having the computer do everything for you. But they might be necessary in some instance. put that back. Let's see here. And you can always enter the number manually if you want to. I want to change this back to maybe, maybe a 48 point leading, so it gets a little wider. And let me show you what the font looks like at the original, which is, if you just do zeros, oops, this one's 0. And then if you ever want to go back to auto, which is basically goes back to the original, which is 14.4, that means it's just barely, the width or the spacing is between the uppercase letter. So that's what it looked like originally. And then kerning. Let's talk about kerning, because kerning is one of my favorite things to think about. Oops. I'm going to go down to a different page for that, right here. Here we go. Zoom back out and zoom in. All right. Whoops. All right, here we go. Kerning. Now, this is very helpful if you're doing a logo type, or if you're doing any sort of display where the word has to be really big. And that's usually where you see the spacing issues come out more readily and easily. So if I was to just do a quick glance at this, and by the way, I recommend that you print out your document so you can study it in hand, because that's where you can sometimes see the kerning issues more. But I've been doing this for quite some time, and I zoom in a lot so I can actually see it on the computer screen. So for instance, for me right now, the B and the R, this gap here is narrower than the gap between the R and the I. I and the G is pretty same. The G and the H okay, but the H and the T is a little tight. So you got a tightness here and a wideness here. What you do is drop your cursor in between the letters that you need to change. Bring this over here. This one right here, I want to zoom in, see if I can get a little closer here, is your kerning. So if I were just to zero this out, we'll see what it looks like at the beginning. You can see it just bumped it out just enough. So I intentionally tightened that up so you can see like some of the spacing. If I were to look at this again, I still think it's a little tight here. And I would just kind of bump it up a little bit, maybe 10. Oops. I need to be in between the letters. There we go. Now I can do it. Maybe 15. Oops. And sometimes that happens too. There we go. I said maybe 15. There we go. So it's a little less tight. Then I think that maybe then the G is a little, maybe need to tighten up a little bit. Come back over here to the B and the R. So, and that's how you kind of, work on the kerning. Whoops, not that way. The H is gone. And sometimes that happens too. So you have to always kind of, it's a lot of dancing around. And I can already kind of tell that for me right now, the space is a lot better than it used to be. Maybe I just need to drop that a little bit. It's a little wide. And then over here, there's a little tightness over here. And the key about kerning is this is a pattern that would happen. So any letters that you already fixed, like the H and the T that we worked on, every letter in the entire document would have the H and the T fixed. And this is why kerners, people who kern specifically for their job, can actually get paid a lot more money, because it's a very tedious and very detail-oriented job. And this is why typography is one of the things that a lot of designers look for in their employees, to be able to understand that typography and how spacing works, and then be able to correct it or amend it accordingly that when the need arises, which oftentimes is a lot, because the fact if you're working on, again, large signs, logos with typography, they're going to look for that detail as part of the process. If you have any questions, let me know, and use your tools, and again, print it out, take a look at it on a piece of paper, and then be able to kind of judge that spacing. There's a specific ruler that's made. It's a transparent ruler with points that you can actually hold on top of it and then measure all the spacing in your font so you can actually get an accurate reading of how to fix it. But I'll put in. But let me know, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll send you the ruler so you can have access to it if you have an opportunity to print it. Thanks.